Hey, what's up, Patreons? Welcome to this week's Q&A. It's a day early because I'm going to be going on that trip starting tomorrow, Friday, and I will make sure to absolutely let everybody know if we're doing any kind of meetup. I don't think so. I think we're going to be jam-packed with work, but if we have any few moments to spare, I'll send out a tweet, and if anything, it would be Saturday night in Chicago. But once again, there's a good chance we might end up just working through the night and doing crazy, stupid nerdiness. So, sorry, I'm not trying to be flaky and wishy-washy on purpose. It's work first, play second. And it's kind of awesome if sometimes while you're working it feels like you're playing, but whatever. Also, I'm going to be even worse than usual responding to emails and stuff in the next week. I always try so hard, especially for people that email me through the Patreon app. I try so hard to get back to people as soon as I can. I think it's kind of disrespectful if somebody's a Patreon of mine and I just ignore them. So I promise you, I swear, if I've ignored anybody, it's never intentional. And if I do it this week, I can't help it. I'll try to catch back up when I get back in late next week, but all I can promise is that I'll do my best. But anyway, on to the Q&As. First up, Adam Brady had a few questions about how to update some of the GC video solutions. So he first asked about the Carby, the one from Insurrection Industries, and I'll actually be updating that this weekend. I believe all you need to do is buy the correct JTAG programmer. You can't buy one of the $5 ones from China. I think the cheapest one is like 40 from Asia and then 60 in the US. So it has to be one of the better ones. And I also don't know if it's a standard header or if you have to put each pin on individually. I guess I'll find out. But all I know is that you can update theirs. And they said that in future versions, they're not going to be populating the pins, but the holes will still be there. So if you already own a JTAG programmer, or if you want to use a modder that has one, you're really only talking about an extra minute's worth of work to either solder the pins on, which cost pennies, or just to solder connections directly to it. So all in all, it's not that big of a deal. I do wish a lot of these places had thought about some way of updating it through like an SD card or even plugging it into your computer via USB, but that would have definitely added cost, if nothing else, and possibly a rewrite of the code. So, it is what it is. For a $75 design that works, as far as I could tell, perfectly, I still think anybody who buys it gets their money's worth. You also mentioned that Badass Consoles released a video showing how to update his version of GC Video. I believe that's all completely custom and only has to do with his specific design. And to be honest, the first thing I did when I saw that video go up was text him and say, "Did you really just post a video about how to update a product that doesn't exist?" So I don't even know what to say about that. I hope we're all able to buy one at some point, and I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, all I know is it's going to be completely separate from what everybody else is doing. I think Michael really wanted to make his own version of this, customize the code, customize the interface. So we'll see how it turns out, but we got to get one first. Either way, though, if you already own an Insurrection, I wouldn't worry. You could either just buy the programmer or contact a modder that already has one. Brian Harmon asked about my thoughts on tube amps versus solid-state amps for retro games, tower versus monitor speakers, and what would my ideal audio setup be for games through 5th generation. So one of the companies that I worked for, the one that did the medical grade computers, the other side of that business, much smaller, was home automation and high-end stereo and video installs. So I got to go to things like Cedia, CEX, EHX, and all those, and I got to sit in demo rooms with $100,000 stereos. The craziest one was, it was $100,000 per speaker for a pair or something like that. And the one thing that I learned from all of that stuff is, unless you're talking a huge difference in quality, how the room is set up is going to make the biggest difference. So that $100,000 speaker is going to sound phenomenal anywhere you put it, but you could spend just a few grand and have something sound ridiculously amazing if you set your room up properly, if you have the space and all that. And as for your other questions, I mean, a lot of this is preference. So my opinions, what I just said was close to fact with a little speculation, but this is 100% opinion. If I had, if I won the lottery and got a nice big house, I would have a very high-end record player and a couple of high-end audio playing devices going through a tube amp, going through 2 tower speakers, some big-ass, like the old school ones used to look, and that would be for listening to that music. It kind of cracks me up when hipsters buy a vinyl release of an album that was recorded and mixed digitally, and you're not going to hear a difference. You're just going to hear, it's almost like fake scan lines. You're going to hear that fake needle hiss on top of a digital recording. And I think I would just use a really good high quality surround sound setup for everything else, including video games. I think the only, once again, personal preference, I would probably set it to 2-speaker mode for things like pre-NES, so Atari or any of the old computers. But from Nintendo and Master System on, I would leave it in surround mode, knowing that you're mostly going to just get the 2 speakers, and I guess there are a few SNES games with the surround sound in them. And then, of course, once you hit PlayStation and up with the optical audio outputs, there's a bunch of different options you could have. So I think that would be my choice. But once again, this thing is really up to the person who could, up to your own personal preference. I could very often hear the difference in all these things, but don't care as much. It doesn't, unless it's an error, it doesn't take away from the experience. And I guess a good analogy for me would be if I saw something played in RF on a beat-ass old TV, it would take away from the experience because I'm used to playing on PVMs. But if I sat down on a decent quality PVM, I wouldn't be thinking, oh, I wish I was playing this on a BVM. I would just totally enjoy it. And if I ever got to the higher end BVMs, I would understand and appreciate the difference. But so I think that's my opinion on a lot of the audio stuff. And just as a useless anecdote, one of those demos I went to, these were dealer cost speakers, so I don't know what they were charging the public, but they did 3 demos in a row. One for a $2,000 speaker system, the other for a $10,000, the other for a $50,000, and then they had the $200,000 each. The difference between the set of $2,000 speakers and the set of $10,000 speakers was noticeable, but I would never spend $8,000 to upgrade. The $50,000 one was pretty incredible, but it wasn't as big of a difference as the price dictated. So I'm not sure if you're an audiophile and you already know all these things that I've just been word vomiting, or if you were curious for yourself. But that all those audio demo rooms I used to go to really changed my opinion on all this. It gave me a better appreciation for some of these things, but I also realized that sometimes you can just get a really good set of things like the ELAC bookshelf speakers and a decent, not the low end, but maybe 1 or 2 steps up, so $300-400 receiver, and you have a perfectly good experience that you definitely don't regret buying. Buster D was following up on his Wonderswan crystal question. It turns out that it was a bad trace that happened after a battery leaked. He was able to get it repaired, and the person who did the repair put up a YouTube video on it. So if anybody was having Wonderswan issues, add that to your list of things to check, and thanks for reporting back. Here's another question regarding PVMs. How good is a PVM 14N6U, especially if you can get it for $135 and some driving? Like I had said earlier, any PVM you get is going to be a good one. That seems like a great price. It is a lower line count, but it's 14 inches, so the lines are closer together, so you're going to get a pretty sharp picture. I mean, in my opinion, it's worth buying. You might get it home and decide that it's not for you, but if I didn't already have a 14-inch, I would pick one of them for that price. Keith Mirach, chimed in that it doesn't have component video, only RGB. So that might be a factor. If you already have all HD Retrovision cables and no RGB SCART, that's certainly something to worry about. And something I forgot to mention in my long PVM rant earlier. So I guess also just checking it has the features you want. But my opinion, as long as it's a PVM, it works, no burn-in or anything, and it has RGB inputs, it's a good monitor and you should be happy with it. Clint Collage had 2 questions. First, he wants to know if the cores from the NT Mini can be ported over to something like the MR setup on the DE10 Nano. And the answer is yes, but Kevtris would have to do it. Those cores are his own code, and there's no way to decode them, to hack into them. I don't know what the proper nomenclature for FPGA cores are, but there's no way to reverse engineer those in a way where you could easily port it. However, if Kevtris chose to, he could. And one of the things that I'd asked him, I think in the first interview I ever did with him, was that, you know, what are your plans long term? And he said he's made sure to take the steps that these things don't get lost to history. So if he just disappears on a desert island tomorrow, he's not going to take these cores with him. He'll make sure they get released eventually. But you know, I have obviously some criticisms of the company Analogue, but they absolutely are under no obligation to ever open source or release these, and I wouldn't expect them to until they were ready to completely retire. They've put a ton of money and a ton of time into these, so I just that's my opinion. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it's my opinion that I wouldn't expect any Kevtris core to be open for a long time if it's anything that Analogue has the potential to resell. And I say that in a positive way, not a critical way against them. I just think I love open source, and I think it's the only way these things are going to get preserved. But if you've already invested a ton of time and money into it, then yeah, you should probably not open those until you're ready to move along. Second question was, can I give advice on the best place to start learning how to recap retro consoles? So a few things. I would order the cap kits from Console 5 because Luke goes out of his way to make sure they're good caps, and he's able to get them so cheaply because he buys them in bulk. So I did an experiment last year, where I bought, I spent an annoying amount of time going through DigiKey, finding the caps, trying to buy the best possible ones, and many of them turned out to be the same that were in the Console 5 kit. And they cost more because I was buying them in tens, not hundreds. So yeah, if it's available on Console 5, I would definitely feel comfortable purchasing from them. The only thing to remember, sometimes they forget to remind people in the little instruction cards that the rating of the cap is what matters, and the voltage can be the same or up. So, for example, if you have a nice big board and there's 10 capacitors and half of them are 220 microfarad 10 volt and the other half are 220 microfarad 16 volt, you might just get all 16 volts in the package because it'll be totally fine to do that, and they'll still physically fit in the area. So that's the only that confused me the first time I got it from them. Other than that, how to do the desoldering and what tools you need could vary wildly between consoles. Some you could do with desolder braid, some you would have a much easier time with those soldering tweezers. Some you could cut the legs of the caps, heat the pins up, pull them through, put the new ones in, but a desoldering gun would probably be way better. So I think a good thing to probably start on might be the Genesis 3, because there's only a few caps. It'll get you used to working on these things, and that's a perfect candidate for a triple bypass. So you get to know the console a little bit, and eventually you might want to look into doing that to get stereo audio and video. You could do a Game Gear, but those tend to have a lot of caps that go wrong, and sometimes it leaks, and then you have to repair traces. So it's possible that you could do a perfectly good capacitor replacement on it, not make a single mistake, and it still doesn't work because a trace has been rotted out, and then you'd have to go back and find that. So that's, you know, those are the two that I would probably start with, just because you could find them easily. But the Game Gear, or the Genesis 3 has the least amount of caps, and with the triple bypass, it's a pretty awesome little console. You do have to solder to small pins doing the triple bypass, but it's a pretty cool project to start with, I think, just my opinion. Kyle Gamblin asked how good the DC HDMI project would be compared to something like a high-quality VGA solution going into the OSSC. That's a good question. If you already own a Dreamcast, a really good VGA solution, and an OSSC, I would really think about this, because you could get line doubled to 960p through the OSSC, you can get the correct aspect ratio, And I believe you could even, with some very heavily customized settings, get the black bar around it so that it is a proper integer upscale. But the DC HDMI is a digital to digital mod. So there's no playing in the analog domain at all. So that right there might always get you a little tiny boost of quality. And there's really no settings to mess with. You plug in your HDMI cable, you set it to the resolution you want, and you're done. Now, of course, with the OSSC, once you put the settings in, you could save them. But I think that you have to redo them every time you update the firmware. There's only 10 slots, and it's not something you could back up to an SD card. So if you don't already have an OSSC, I would just look into the DC HDMI when it's released next month, maybe? Soon, probably by the end of the year, I would say. If you already own a VGA cable and an OSSC, I would try to tweak it as best as you can and see how you feel. If you still think that it's lacking and maybe you'd want another solution, grab the DC HDMI. Or if you're a streamer, I would buy that anyway, because now you have dual outputs and every option you could imagine. John Harrison asked about the Nintendo Switch custom firmware post that I had just written a few days ago. He said that my article said that it's the world's first Switch custom firmware, but isn't the Team Executor SX Pro considered to be custom firmware? He's confused by that and planned to use the device and software when it comes in. To be honest, I'm really confused by it too. I'm heavily confused by all of the different solutions that came out for it, the huge drama that happened, which I don't even want to get into because I don't know anybody involved, so it's not even worth talking about. And to be perfectly honest, I just really read through the guides and everything and just did a quick opinion on it. So maybe I was wrong, but I think the reason they were calling it the first truly custom firmware is because when you boot into it, you have full control of the device. Whereas I think the other one, maybe you don't. But to be honest, maybe I shouldn't have worded it that way. I certainly wasn't going for clickbait. Very often when I have short posts like that, I just really want to get the information out to people. So it's, I don't want to just put, hey, check this out, and then that's it. I want to throw something else in. So I'll try to read through an article and give a quick synopsis. So if I did get that wrong, email me. I'll happily update it. But I was very confused by that entire Switch custom firmware hacking jailbreak scene altogether, and I haven't done mine yet. So hopefully we'll get solid news about that at some point. And lastly, Jason D wants to know my opinion on Analogue's marketing phrase that they're preserving video game history. Well, first and foremost, I have never wavered from my statement that Analogue's marketing team is brilliant. They do everything right. They have all of their press releases planned. I mean, whoever's in charge of that, I don't know if it's Chris Tabor himself that's doing it or if he hired a place to do it for him, but I think that everything that they've been doing is kick-ass. And it is my personal opinion that when you do things like word things in a certain way that don't change anything else, a great example of this would be blast processing. That's kind of stupid, but kind of awesome at the same time. And by marketing around that, they didn't change the games, they didn't change the console, they didn't change anything that mattered. They just changed the marketing behind it. So I think any way that you're able to get more information out to more people is a huge win. And, the more people that know about these products, the better. I kind of went on a long positive rant about this on the Retro Roundtable last night, but basically I want Analogue to sell millions of these things so that they can get funding to make even more stuff. So if saying things like, I believe one of the tweets was, no bullshit hybrid emulation here or something, they definitely swore. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was I thought it was a great way to market themselves. And the fact is, the whole preserving video game history, that will remain to be seen. If 20 years go by and Analogue is still around and they're retiring but taking all of their cores with them, then no, they're not preserving video game history at all. But if they're doing this, they're making their money, they're going from project to project, and if they eventually tire of it or if they still want to manufacture them, but so many other competitors are out there that they just say, here you go, we're done with it, now we're open sourcing it, then they absolutely would be preserving video game history. So it's, you know, really the future holds the answer to whether that statement's true or not, but I'm a huge fan of their marketing. I can't believe some of the things they've gotten to pull off the past few releases, and I'm very happy for them and hope they sell millions. I hope they have many more products that are in the same level of quality as that. All right, that's it for this week. For any newcomers to the channel, please post your questions for next week down below on the Patreon page, not the YouTube page. I really like to make these a Patreon-only focus. So any questions you have, post wherever you find this video on my Patreon page, and I'll try to answer them all next week. As always, thank you so much for all your support, and I'll see you next time.